Eleanor Hartwell had worked at the Boston Public Library for 43 years. At 71 years old, she knew every corner of the building, every regular patron, and every book that passed through her hands. Her gray hair was always pulled into a neat bun, and her reading glasses hung from a silver chain around her neck. She loved the smell of old paper and the quiet rustle of pages turning. Today, like every Tuesday, Eleanor sorted through returned books, checking for damage and preparing them to go back on the shelves. Most books came back in perfect condition. Some had coffee stains or dog-eared pages. But when Eleanor opened the copy of Pride and Prejudice that had been returned that morning, she found something unusual. Handwritten notes covered the margins of every page. Small, precise handwriting in fading blue ink. Eleanor adjusted her glasses and began to read. The notes were not about the novel. They were journal entries, dates spanning from June 2003 to October 2005. Eleanor's heart quickened as she read the first entry. June 14, 2003. Dominic does not know about the baby. I cannot tell him. He thinks the child is his, but it belongs to his brother Franco. What have I done? This lie will destroy everything. Eleanor sat down heavily in her chair. This was not her business. She should stop reading immediately. But her eyes continued scanning the pages, pulled forward by a story that felt like watching a terrible accident unfold. The woman who wrote these notes was terrified, trapped, and desperate. Each entry revealed more details about a deception that had lasted years. Eleanor checked the library card attached to the book. The name read, Catalina Romano, with an address in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's wealthiest neighborhoods. Eleanor knew that name. Everyone in Boston knew the Romano family, though most people pretended not to. Dominic Romano controlled half the city's underground operations, from the docks to the casinos. His wife Catalina was often photographed at charity events, a beautiful woman with sad eyes who smiled for cameras but never seemed truly happy. Eleanor had seen her picture in the newspaper just last week, standing beside her husband at a museum fundraiser. The couple had been married for 25 years and had one son, Michael, who was now a grown man working in the family business. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the pages. If these notes were real, then Michael Romano was not Dominic's biological son. He was the son of Dominic's brother Franco, a man who had died in a car accident 20 years ago under mysterious circumstances. The implications made Eleanor's stomach turn. Eleanor knew she should simply reshelve the book and pretend she had never read the notes. This was dangerous knowledge, the kind that got people hurt in a city like Boston. But Eleanor had spent her entire life believing in truth and honesty. She had raised 3 children alone after her husband died in Vietnam. She had worked 2 jobs to put those children through college. She had never backed down from doing what was right, even when it was hard. These notes represented a woman's confession, hidden in a library book for 2 decades. Someone needed to know the truth. Eleanor made a decision that would change everything. She carefully removed the book from the return pile and placed it in her bag. When her shift ended at 5 o'clock, she would return it personally to Catalina Romano. The woman deserved to know her secret had been discovered. The Romano estate sat behind tall iron gates in Beacon Hill. Eleanor stood outside those gates at 6 in the evening, clutching the book against her chest. A security camera swiveled to face her, and a voice crackled through the intercom. State your business. Eleanor cleared her throat, trying to sound calm. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I am a librarian at the Boston Public Library. I need to return a book to Mrs. Romano personally. It is urgent. There was a long pause. Eleanor could imagine security guards inside consulting with each other, trying to decide if this elderly woman posed any threat. Finally, the gates swung open with a mechanical groan. Walk up the driveway. Someone will meet you at the door. Eleanor's legs felt weak as she walked up the long, curved driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. The Romano mansion loomed ahead, all white columns and huge windows that glowed with warm light. A muscular man in a black suit opened the front door before Eleanor could knock. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, lingering on the book in her hands. I need to check your bag, he said flatly. Eleanor handed over her small purse, without protest. The guard searched through it thoroughly, finding nothing but tissues, mints, and her wallet. He nodded toward the book. What is that about? Eleanor met his eyes steadily. It is a personal matter for Mrs. Romano. I need to speak with her directly. The guard spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder, his words too quiet for Eleanor to hear. After a moment, he stepped aside. Wait in the sitting room. Mrs. Romano will see you shortly. Eleanor followed him through a grand foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier. The sitting room was elegant but cold, filled with expensive furniture that looked rarely used. Eleanor sat on the edge of a cream-colored sofa and waited. Catalina Romano entered the room 15 minutes later. She was 62 years old, but could have passed for 50, with dark hair streaked with silver and high cheekbones that gave her an aristocratic air. She wore a simple black dress and pearl earrings. Her eyes, the same sad eyes Eleanor had seen in photographs, studied the elderly librarian with confusion. You are from the library? Catalina asked, her voice carrying a slight Italian accent. Eleanor stood, holding out the book. Yes, Mrs. Romano. You returned this book to the library yesterday. When I processed it, I found handwritten notes in the margins. Very personal notes. I thought you would want the book back before anyone else saw them. Catalina's face went completely white. She stared at the book like it was a snake about to strike. Her hand reached out slowly, fingers trembling as they touched the worn cover. You read them, she whispered. Eleanor nodded. I am sorry. I did not mean to invade your privacy, but once I started reading, I could not stop. I thought you should know that your secret was at risk of being discovered by others. Catalina sank into a chair, clutching the book to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, smudging her careful makeup. I forgot about these notes, she said, her voice breaking. I wrote them in this book 20 years ago when I was desperate and afraid. I used to check this book out from the library every few months, writing my feelings in the margins because I had no one else to tell. Then I stopped borrowing it. I forgot it still existed until last week when I was cleaning and found it on my shelf. I thought I should finally return it after all these years. She looked up at Eleanor with anguish in her eyes. How much did you read? Enough to understand what you were going through, Eleanor said gently. She sat down across from Catalina, keeping her voice low and kind. You had an affair with your husband's brother. You became pregnant. Your husband never knew the truth about his son's parentage. Catalina sobbed openly now, her whole body shaking. Franco, and I never meant for it to happen. Dominic was gone for months on business in Italy. I was lonely. Franco was kind to me during that time. It happened once, only once, but that was enough. When I realized I was pregnant, I prayed it was Dominic's child. But when Michael was born, I knew. He had Franco's eyes, Franco's smile, Franco's gentle nature. Nothing like Dominic. She wiped her tears with shaking hands. Franco died in a car accident when Michael was 5 years old. Some people whispered that Dominic had him killed, but I never believed that. They were brothers. Eleanor leaned forward. Does anyone else know the truth? Catalina shook her head violently. No one. Franco never knew he had a son. I never told him about the pregnancy. He died thinking our affair was just one mistake we would both forget. Michael does not know. Dominic does not know. It has been my burden alone for 25 years. She looked at Eleanor with desperate eyes. What are you going to do with this information? Are you going to tell someone? The police? The newspapers? Eleanor felt a wave of compassion for this woman. She was not a monster. She was someone who had made a terrible mistake and had been living with the consequences every single day since. I am not going to tell anyone, Eleanor said firmly. That is not my place. I came here to return your book and warn you. That is all. Relief flooded Catalina's face, but it lasted only a moment. A deep voice from the doorway shattered the fragile peace. What book is that, Catalina? Both women turned to see Dominic Romano standing in the entrance to the sitting room. He was a large man with silver hair and cold, calculating eyes. He wore an expensive suit that could not hide the dangerous energy radiating from him. Everything about his posture suggested violence held carefully in check. Catalina stood quickly, hiding the book behind her back. Nothing important, Dominic. Just a library book I forgot to return. Dominic's eyes moved to Eleanor, assessing her. And who is this? Eleanor forced herself to remain calm, even as her heart hammered. I am Eleanor Hartwell, a librarian. I was simply returning Mrs. Romano's overdue book. Dominic walked into the room slowly, like a predator circling prey. How considerate. We have people who handle such trivial matters. Why did you come personally? Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. 43 years dealing with difficult patrons had taught her to stand her ground. Your wife's library account had significant overdue fees. I wanted to discuss the matter privately rather than sending collection notices to your home. It was a weak lie, but it was the best Eleanor could manage under pressure. Dominic's eyes narrowed. He clearly did not believe her, but he could not prove she was lying. Catalina, show me the book. Catalina's face lost all color. It is nothing, Dominic. Just a novel. Then you will not mind showing me. His voice was soft, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. Catalina looked at Eleanor with pleading eyes, then slowly brought the book forward. Dominic took it from her hands and began flipping through the pages. His expression remained neutral as he scanned the handwritten notes in the margins. Eleanor watched his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Dominic read silently for what felt like an eternity. The room was so quiet Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. Catalina stood frozen, tears streaming down her face again. Finally, Dominic closed the book with a soft thud. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the cover. How long have you known? He asked Catalina, his voice dangerously calm. I wrote those notes 20 years ago, Catalina whispered. I have carried this guilt every day since. Dominic turned to Eleanor. And you read these notes? Eleanor nodded, refusing to show fear. Yes. I brought the book here, so your wife could have it back before anyone else found it. I have no intention of sharing what I read with anyone. Dominic studied her for a long moment. You could have made copies. You could have photographs. You could be working for my enemies, using this information as leverage. Eleanor stood up, her spine straight despite her age. Mr. Romano, I am 71 years old. I have worked at the same library for 4 decades. I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a small pension. I am not involved in your world, and I have no interest in your business. I came here tonight because I believe in doing the right thing, and the right thing was returning your wife's private thoughts to her before they became public knowledge. Something in Eleanor's voice must have convinced him, because Dominic's stance relaxed slightly. He looked at the book again, then at his wife. Franco, he said quietly. Michael is Franco's son. Catalina collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. I am so sorry, Dominic. I never meant to hurt you. It happened once, just once, when you were in Italy. I have regretted it every day of my life. Dominic's face was unreadable. Does Michael know? No, Catalina said through her tears. He knows nothing. I never told anyone. Franco died without knowing he had a son. Dominic walked to the window, staring out at his manicured grounds. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. I always wondered why Michael was so different from me. He has no stomach for the business. He is gentle, thoughtful, artistic. I thought he took after your side of the family. I never suspected. He turned back to face Catalina, and Eleanor saw something she did not expect in his eyes. Pain. Not anger, not rage, but deep, wounded pain. I loved Franco. He was my younger brother, my best friend. When he died in that accident, part of me died too. Catalina stood, reaching for her husband. Dominic, please. I know I do not deserve forgiveness, but Michael is innocent in all this. He is still your son, in every way that matters. You raised him. Dominic flinched away from her touch. Every way that matters? He carries my name. He will inherit my empire. And none of it is rightfully his. The weight of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor understood suddenly what was at stake here. In Dominic's world, blood and legacy were everything. A son who was not truly his son could not inherit the family business. It would be seen as weakness, deception, an insult to the Romano name. Mr. Romano, Eleanor said quietly, drawing his attention. I raised 3 children alone after my husband died in the war. Not one of them shared my blood. They were my husband's children from his first marriage. But I loved them as if they were mine, because love is not about DNA. It is about who shows up every day, who teaches them right from wrong, who sacrifices for their happiness. Dominic stared at her, his expression unreadable. You are comparing your situation to mine? I am saying that Michael Romano is your son because you made him your son. Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. You taught him to walk. You dried his tears. You attended his school plays and his baseball games. You shaped who he is today. Franco may have given him life, but you gave him everything else. That cannot be erased by a revelation written in the margins of a book. Dominic was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked at Catalina. Leave us, he said to Eleanor and his wife. I need to think. Catalina started to protest, but Eleanor touched her arm gently. We should go. The 2 women left the sitting room together. In the grand foyer, Catalina gripped Eleanor's hands desperately. Thank you for trying. But you do not know my husband. He will never forgive this betrayal. My marriage is over. My son's inheritance is gone. Everything is destroyed because I could not keep my secret buried. Eleanor squeezed Catalina's hands. You do not know what he will decide. Give him time to process the shock. Sometimes the truth, as painful as it is better than living a lie. Catalina's laugh was bitter. Easy words from someone who will walk away from this tonight and never think of us again. Eleanor met her eyes. I will think of you every day. And I will hope that love proves stronger than pride. A guard escorted Eleanor out of the mansion. As she walked down the long driveway toward the gates, Eleanor wondered if she had made the right choice coming here. Perhaps she should have destroyed the book and let the secret remain buried. But secrets had a way of destroying people from the inside out. At least now the truth was in the open, and the Romano family could decide what to do with it. Eleanor reached the street and began the long walk to the bus stop, her legs aching and her mind heavy with worry. 3 weeks later, Eleanor was reshelving books in the history section when someone approached her. She turned to find Michael Romano standing there, a young man of 25 with gentle eyes and an artist's hands. Eleanor recognized him from the photographs in Catalina's sitting room. Mrs. Hartwell? He asked quietly. Eleanor nodded, her heart racing. My mother told me what you did. Returning the book. Trying to protect her secret. Eleanor set down the books she was holding. I am sorry if my actions caused you pain. Michael shook his head. You did not cause anything. My mother's choices, my father's pride, the lies we tell ourselves, those things caused pain. You just brought the truth to light. He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. My father told me everything last week. About Franco being my biological father. About the affair. About the notes in the book. Eleanor waited, afraid to ask the obvious question. Michael answered it anyway. My father has decided that I am still his son. He said that Franco gave me life, but he gave me everything else, and that makes me a Romano in the only way that matters. Tears filled his eyes. He told my mother he forgives her. It will take time for their marriage to heal, but they are trying. And me? I am learning to accept that the man I thought was my uncle was actually my father, and the man I thought was my father chose to be my father anyway. That is a greater gift than biology could ever give. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a check. My parents wanted me to donate this to the library in your name, for believing in truth, and for believing that family is more than blood. Eleanor looked at the check and gasped. $100,000. This is too much, she protested. Michael smiled, and Eleanor saw Franco in that smile, gentle and kind. It is not enough for what you did. You saved my family by risking everything to tell the truth. That kind of courage is priceless. He turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Hartwell? Thank you for returning the book. Sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set us free. Eleanor watched him walk away, his shoulders straight and his step light. She looked down at the check in her hands, then at the rows of books surrounding her. Stories of love and loss, truth and lies, families torn apart and stitched back together. She had spent 43 years believing in the power of words written on pages. Today, she had learned that sometimes the most important stories were the ones hidden in margins, waiting for someone brave enough to read them and wise enough to know what to do with the truth. Eleanor carefully folded the check and placed it in her pocket. Then she returned to her work, reshelving books in their proper places, where they belonged.